Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Truth or Trend, where Dr. Vrzal and I take on different topics and help you determine whether there's real truth in there or it's something that is just solid marketing. And today we have a really special guest. We have a nearly world champion jet skiing individual here, who will, future world champion jet skier, who is also somebody who has a huge history of working on farms and especially organic farms. And I have so much that I want to ask him about this and so much I want to share with you. We have so much confusion out there whether or not you should do things organic or not. And how do you actually have confidence that it is? And it looks like we just lost Dr. Vrzal, but he'll be back, I'm sure, because he is over in the Netherlands joining us because it's such an important topic. But I'm showing you here some images that are coming up of the farm, and it's the Standard Process Farm. This is 95 years of whole food nutrition. I'm not sure that the farm has been around for 95 years, but I know that the whole food products have been around. And I just want to say welcome, Jack. Thank you for taking the time to be here and answer some questions and help people really understand what it means to be organic, why it's important, and also about like how you are actually growing food for the nutritional value versus like the yield and the weight. Maybe you could start with that right away, just kind of jumping right in and saying, this is what is so unusual and new. And what is, I think, the future of farming is actually trying to nourish people with more than carbohydrates, right? So welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me on. This just happens to be like one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. So
Nice.
absolutely stoked to be on here with all of you and talking about my favorite topic. So yeah, I mean, I think it was probably 6, 7 years ago when I kind of was working out on the farm, and I realized this truth that we've been farming for hundreds of years for yield and not nutritional value. And it kind of hit me like, man, there's never been an incentive for a seed breeder or a farmer to grow a crop with higher nutrient value, right? Farmers are paid for pounds across the scale, not total nutrient density. The nutrients, across the country really aren't even being tracked in our food, except in some of these isolated instances. So that's one of those things. Being a supplement company and growing food for the purpose of nutritional density with products, the benefit of that is really maximizing nutritional potency. So we do that through a few ways, and I'll kind of probably dive a little deeper in that throughout the podcast. But the biggest way that we do that is really the foundation of it is regenerative agriculture, right? The foundation is good, healthy soil that we've spent decades developing and regenerating. If you don't have healthy soil, you can't grow nutritionally dense crops. But we've taken it kind of like you mentioned, we've taken it a step further and said, okay, how do we actually select crops for higher nutrient value? And then how do we breed for nutritional value as well? How do we actually start developing different varieties of crops that have a higher nutritional density, and get back to some of these original crops that have been kind of bred for high yield but degraded in total nutrient density? And so that's one of the things that, like you mentioned, we're really one of the only people out there doing it that, to my knowledge, right? Who would want to grow a crop that yields a third of what a commercialized variety grows? Who would do that? I mean, it's crazy. If you're getting paid for pounds on a scale, there's just no way you're going to do that. There's just no way you can afford to do that. And so I think there's a lot of work that we have to do to kind of change the way we incentivize agriculture and farmers across the country. But I think that is something that really sets our farm apart, certainly gets me fired up, and I think is going to be something that hopefully, we can dream, right, Dustin, is, hopefully that becomes the status quo, right? And not the exception. So,
Well, at least it'll hopefully start trickling into the organic farms across the country to really
mhm.
focus on that. I was really struck by, I was just out at the farms, I think it was last weekend, and they handed us some oats from what would be grown, and they're big fat oats, right? And then the ones that you're growing on the farm, and they're not nearly as fat. So what's the difference? Is it just carbohydrates, or how is it that they were bred to be so big and fat versus what, really truly gives you value?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And one of my greatest examples, I think, or our greatest examples on the farm are those ancient oats actually. And so yeah, there's a lot of things that have been bred into the oat variety to make them more palatable. They've definitely bred the carbohydrate gene in, which has decreased the protein level of a commercialized oat, and it's made it plumper, right? Probably
Hmm.
made it yield a little higher. But actually, we started growing back, and one of the ways that you can kind of develop this is actually going back to some of those ancient varieties of grains, and we've done that with the ancient oats, is what you saw on the farm, and so actually, when you look back at some of these ancient grains, they look more like a rice. They're kind of like a black oat, and they look totally different than you would think it's rice or something. You wouldn't even think it's an oat. So it's
Mm.
actually that's a good point. The first thing that you can notice is just the way that these different crops look.
Yeah.
And so what's really unique is when you start to actually look at the nutrient profile, that's when things really start to get exciting. So just kind of off the top of my head, and I talk about this all the time, but if you look at and you compare a commercial oat to an ancient oats have over 800% increase in total avenanthramides, which is a specific secondary metabolite that's unique to the oat variety. They have 24 to 45% higher protein level. You look at things that the US is totally deficient in, like choline, vitamin K. Choline's 360% higher in the ancient oat variety.
Wow.
Vitamin K is elevated 500%. You can go down the list, and I have a slide that when I present, I show that. And you just go down the list. It's like, these are not 2 to 5% increases in nutrient value, right? These are leaps and bounds, and this is almost, it looks like totally different crop, but from a nutrient perspective, it really is a totally different crop. And that's really an exciting project that we've finally developed here and gotten into product.
So Dr. Vrzal and I, and a lot of the practitioners who watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, we really do want to be able to nourish people with food. And that's the goal, right? Is to help them say, where can we get this from our food? But the problem is what we're learning is we tell them, hey, eat some more carrots.
Mm.
The carrots that they're eating aren't what they used to be, right? That was something else that you said. If they're going out and getting carrots at, say, Whole Foods or whatever, are they really getting the value out of them if they're not organically grown versus not? Can you help people understand why it's so important that they're getting, because you mentioned carrots specifically, I remember in your presentation, like what
Yeah,
happens to them.
yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And I think that's something that people don't realize either. And there's some really great research that's coming out to really validate this idea that in fact, breeding for higher yield has degraded nutritional value. And
Mm.
so, in conjunction with soil degradation, we've also had genetic erosion, right? And so, yeah, like if you look at Peruvian
Genetic
potatoes, they,
erosion. Now that's not a phrase you hear every day, Dr. T. I'm going to use that the next time you mess up. Are you suffering from genetic erosion? No. So bring us back to that. Help us understand what that means exactly.
yeah, so a lot of these genes basically that uh, contain more of the higher nutrient value have been degraded. So we've genetically changed over the years, really bred these crops to express themselves in a totally different manner, right? And so when they actually are grown, they have a totally different nutrient profile. They look totally different, right? Some of that genetic erosion, if you will, would be like the ancient oat looking like rice, but now we have this nice plump round oat that's nutritionally, genetically eroded from a nutritional standpoint.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And this isn't just ancient oats. Like that's a good little example because we have a lot of data on that one to just directly apples to apples make the comparison and talk about all those nutrient values. But it's happened really across the board, right? You look at apples and blueberries and potatoes. You know, one of the things is corn, right? Corn actually used to be blue, right? And it actually had a total nutrient value close to 100 from a nutrient density standpoint. Now it's like 1.5 or something like that. Peruvian potatoes used to have a total nutrient density of like 170. Now they're like 5.4. And I've got a really great slide that I often talk about that shows like each crop and just the genetic erosion, right? The drop off of that nutrient value. And so that's one of those things that I like to highlight because people, it isn't that simple, right? People don't often think about that.
Right. Well, what we like about you is that you grow all these with the most nutritional value, and then you conveniently put them in these little, bite-sized morsels for us to get all that nutrition.
There we go.
What advice would you give to somebody who is out there looking to try to get all of their nutrients from food? What is something that they should be looking for, and how do they
Mm.
know if they're buying an organic vegetable or not that it is actually has value? Because there's a lot of challenge to that these days, right? There are a lot of people who say farmers. I've had farmers actually come into my own office and tell me I only have to do a portion of my farm to really be qualified as organic, to the
Yeah.
standards. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You really have to trust your source, right? And one of the things that I think is makes me more optimistic is I just heard a statistic the other day, and I have not validated this in any way, shape, or form. So, but I kind of like to believe it. I don't want to validate that it's right or wrong, actually, because it kind of makes me feel better about the state of the U.S. right now. But I heard that 40% of the population is now growing at least part of their produce themselves. And
Wow. Hmm.
when I think about the answer to this, Dustin, is really we've got to get away from really highly commercialized markets, right? And to feed America, we almost have to get back to growing at least some of our own food ourselves, right? Having our own gardens, sourcing our seeds from good suppliers, good organic suppliers, and actually growing our own produce, developing our own soil, right? That is really, if you're going to say, really trust where your food is coming from, you kind of either have to know somebody that's growing it, like you guys know me, right? You've been to the farm, you've come and seen our operations. And that's what we love about Standard Process is we can be that transparent and say, come out and see our farm, come out and talk to our farmers, and we'll tell you the story, right? And so, one, the best way, grow your own produce. I mean, even if it's start with one crop that you're fascinated with. Maybe it's a beet, right? Or a Swiss chard, right? Maybe you really like apples. Plant an apple tree, right? For me, it's wasabi. I love wasabi. And so I started growing wasabi actually.
Wow.
Um, but most of the time, my garden really is the supplements, right? Because I know where they've been grown. I know it's convenient when I'm on the road all the time. I just have to take the pills. But one, I think, is really going back to, we've kind of got to start growing our own produce, raising our own chickens, that is, I think, the best way of doing it. And then the second best would be those local co-ops, right? Those local farms near you, or somebody like us that you can come see, and really trust them, right? Because in any industry, there are those loopholes. And I think you certainly have that with organic as well. And so you really do have to trust where you're getting your food from. And the other thing that I'll touch on is organic doesn't mean regenerative, right? And
Mm.
and so I think oftentimes those two things are like paired together. And certainly we're both organic and regenerative. So sometimes when I talk, those two things can kind of, cross and be
Right.
two in the same. Um, but they really are two different things, right? There's one thing organically, right? You're required to not use any synthetic pesticide, fungicide, herbicide, no GMOs, no petroleum-based forms of fertilizers, things like that. On paper, you're clean, right? But then there's regenerative, right? And regenerative practices, I think a lot of times, yes, it's good not to spread the synthetics and things like that, petroleum-based fertilizers on the soil. That's foundational. But regenerative is a lot more, right? And I think it's more focused on what are you doing to leave your soil in a better place than you found it, right? And those kinds of practices really get into more of the cover cropping, the crop rotation, the composting. What are you giving back to your soil to make sure that you're not just taking from it? Because when we plant crops and we harvest those crops, you sure as hell bet we are taking nutrients from that soil, right? And putting them into a pill and shipping them all over the US. So how are we giving back? How are we giving back from an organic matter perspective, from a mineral standpoint? And that's really what we do from a regenerative standpoint. So those two buckets, I think, are often confused. And one of the things I'll say all the time, right? You hear that, well, I guess organic can still spray pesticides and organic can do this and that. And I'm sure there are loopholes. We in Wisconsin are certified by MOSA, and it's very strict. Like we have to, down to the tenth of an acre, tell them what we're growing, right? What we grew the last 3 years. We get audited. We have a blind audit on one of our crops where every year they come in and they say, okay, we grow 20 to 30 different crops, which is really unique. Most farms don't grow that. But actually, they'll come in and they'll just blind select a crop. Okay, we're auditing buckwheat this year. Tell me who your seed supplier is, where you got the seeds, exactly how much you bought of the seed, and exactly down to the tenth of an acre where you planted it, and we're going to go out and check that field. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, our certifier is pretty strict. So I can only speak from our experience with organic. I don't know exactly what it looks like in other states and stuff like that. And when you're on a giant commercial farm with thousands of acres, potentially it's easier to hide some of those things. But for us, it seems pretty strict, and I can appreciate that, and I would hope that they're doing that everywhere. But that was kind of a loaded reply to that question, Dustin. But it was kind of a loaded question, so
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know.
sure. Yeah.
So
Dr.
you're talking about regenerative farming and so on, and we're recognizing that the minerals and all the nutrients in that food comes from the soil ultimately. I know you're putting the organic matter back into the soil. In other words, that what you don't use of the crop, right? You're kind of turning that back in. How are you continuing to add and keep those nutrients that we're taking from the vegetables and so on, in putting them in tablets? How are you putting that back into the soil for the next crop?
Yeah, for sure. So you kind of touched on it with the composting there. So I'll touch on that piece of it. So, and I know there's a lot of practitioners that listen to this podcast. So, you're either on a standard process label, you're going to see we'll use buckwheat for an example, a buckwheat extract or a buckwheat pulp, right? The
Okay.
buckwheat pulp is we chop the entire plant and we dry it down and put it into a product. A buckwheat extract is we chop the crop, we juice it, we dry the juice extract, which is more highly concentrated in bioflavonoids, vitamin C, things like that. It has a totally different therapeutic effect in the body, as you guys know. But what's when we are juicing that crop, and majority of our buckwheat and our alfalfa, which are two of our biggest crops, those are going into extracts. So we have all of that dried pulp material that's then left over, and we take all that dried pulp material and we compost it. So we actually end up spreading around 4.5 million pounds of compost back on our soil every year. So that is one of our biggest contributors to increasing soil organic matter. And the other way is the other big way, I should say. There's a lot of different ways we do this, but cover cropping. And so with cover crops, right, this is our opportunity to really invest back in the soil. So we'll grow, instead of growing beets to harvest for beta food, right, we're going to grow a blend of 10, 12 different crops, a millet, sunflowers, chickling vetch, maybe daikon radish to break up and fight soil compaction. And then when the crop gets 5 to 6 feet tall, right? Some of these crops can get that tall. Some of them aren't going to. Some of them are going, down into the root system and stuff like that. But when this cover crop gets 5 to 6 feet tall, we'll actually work it back into the soil, till it back into the soil,
Mhm.
and that acts
Mhm.
as green manure. And so now, instead of chopping all of that and taking it away and leaving the soil with nothing, now you've
Mhm.
just sucked a bunch of nutrients out and taken them away. Now you've sucked a lot of nutrients out. You've pulled nitrogen from the atmosphere in different ways with some of the leguminous crops that are actually able to absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere. And now you're releasing all of those compounds and giving that organic matter back to the soil in a really profound way. And so
Mhm.
those, I think, are two of the biggest things that we've done to make sure that we are being regenerative, to make sure that we are being sustainable, and to make sure that we're giving back a lot of those nutrients to the soil, rather than just planting buckwheat and taking it, and then all of a sudden, buckwheat that's rich in magnesium. Now we're depleting the soil in magnesium. And so
Right.
those are two of the biggest ways that we're really making sure that we're giving back those nutrients.
Wow.
So
Well,
the farmer is not soil, right? So that
oh no. He's in the
ton,
Netherlands on a boat, so we might be losing
right?
a bit of what he's asking. I'm going to ask him to type it in the chat so that we can get the question. And while he's froze, I want to go back to this idea about the seeds you were talking about, Jack.
Yeah.
Because you have a seed bank basically, right? And so
Mhm.
a lot of people, like you are suggesting very wisely, and I think is great to grow their own garden. How do they know if the seeds that they're using are, you know what I mean? And not to complicate it, but
Oh,
how do they know that the seeds actually have the value versus the seeds that you're planting on the farm?
sure, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna go back to it's always best to do it yourself, right? Like if you can harvest some of your own seed from some of your crop, like you plant buckwheat in your garden, if you can let some go to seed and harvest your own seed, that's hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Especially without the tools and the equipment and stuff like that. But one of the things that I would say is organic sources typically are better, right? And so from our standpoint, we do beyond just the ability of actually breeding and developing our own varieties like the ancient oats, like we're doing with buckwheat as a project right now. We can actually select for it. And so we'll like red ursa kale back in 2005, for example, which is used in a lot of our different products. We actually grew 10, 12, 15 different varieties of kale on the organic market. We sourced them all, we planted them, and then we did nutrient analysis on them. And
Mhm.
so what we were looking for, and we ended up on this red ursa kale that has this like purple or red vein throughout. And typically that's an indicator of better nutritional value and nutrient value. So, um, in fact, we were right. When we did the nutrient analysis, it actually was a lot higher in those sulfur-containing glucosinolates, right? That we typically are using for detoxification and things like that. So one of the visual indicators can be the color, right? If you have a reddish color or a purple color in your crop, that's probably going to indicate some sort of a unique phytonutrient profile. And
Mhm.
so I would say, find and grow a plethora of different colors, right? We have this great tool, Holistic Matters. If the listeners haven't checked out Holistic Matters, just a fantastic tool for patients and practitioners to both go on and check that out. And we have this series called The Color of Food.
Mhm.
And it's so cool because it talks about all of these different colors and the different phytonutrients that they express, right? So you think about a Spanish black radish, right? The outside of that radish, the black skin is what contains those tannins, right? And that also those sulfur containing detoxification phytonutrients as well. Then you have crops like the red ursa kale, right? That has a whole different nutrient profile. Then you have a red beetroot, right? That's high in those dietary nitrates that are good for heart health and things like that. Typically, those red colors are good for cardiovascular health. I know that's a passion of yours, Dustin. So, anytime you can get a buckwheat seed that has a red leaf in it instead of just being all green, um, those are typical like indicators for something richer
I
there.
think kind of like where people I think are learning like the yolk of an egg, right? The paler it is, the
Hmm.
less value it has. The darker the rich, the orange it is, and that's the same thing with vegetables. So the more
Hmm.
vibrant the colors are, is what you're saying. And you guys have been talking about this for a long time. But just to give
Yeah,
people, something to look for, to understand whether or not they're getting value out of it is great. Dr.
yeah.
B did get his question out there because I think you're back, Dr. B. But he wants to the nutrient dense plants being stronger, the plants as opposed to the weaker plants that need pesticides. Can you speak
Hmm.
a little bit?
Oh, I might have missed the question. Can you ask one more time?
He said, could you please speak to the nutrient dense plants being stronger as opposed to the weaker plants that need pesticides, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And there's actually multiple different ways that kind of the whole weakness thing is brought out, right? You can kind of cultivate a weak crop by over irrigating too. even if you're not just using pesticides and stuff like that, if you're giving a crop water, I'm kind of going on a tangent here instead of answering your question
Go on
directly.
tangents. We love
This
it.
is good.
All of this
This
stuff
is
is
good.
fascinating.
Yeah. So how my brain works. I'm just all over the map. But um, actually, using too much water can do that same thing. And so when you're kind of babying, there's this idea of like babying a crop, right? And so if you're giving it, all the nutrients that it needs topically, right? Or, spreading a lot of petroleum-based fertilizer, it's very easy for it to get instead of having to build those roots to actually go down and absorb those minerals, those vitamins, those nutrients from the soil. The same is true with water, right? Um, with water, if you overwater, it doesn't develop a deep root system at all. And so that can actually impact the ability for it to grow nutrient dense variety as well. Because if it doesn't develop those deep root system, if you're constantly just irrigating it, every time it gets hot, you just irrigate, right? You don't let it kind of become resilient and have to fight and have to push its root system down. That can actually have an effect on nutrient density as well. And so one of the things on our farm that we try to do, we have two pivots. We can irrigate about a third of our total acres, but we use it very sparingly. If we're transplanting crops, we will use it because they're used to the greenhouse, and then they go into transplant shock. So sometimes you got to baby them a little bit to get them to that point where they can actually be resilient. And so crop resilience is really important. It's actually, the immune system of a Spanish black radish, right? Like that is where a lot of these phytonutrients come into play too. A lot of those, you think about a radish, how spicy it is, right? That is actually the plant developing those nutrients and to protect itself, right? And so it does have some of those protecting effects have been tied to the phytonutrients and the health benefits, the outcomes of the Spanish black radish and different foods. And so there's definitely you definitely have to be careful about that. The other aspect with using pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that, maybe not so much making the crop weaker, but like maybe I'll go down the road of like how are we even farming without that stuff, right? Because I think a lot of times, these farms rely on it, and we don't have those same safety nets that other farms have, right? And so the biggest way that we do that and mitigate our risk for losing a crop to insects or diseases without pesticides and herbicide or fungicide, we actually have a really extensive crop rotation. And so this actually has regenerative benefits to it as well. But our crop rotation is typically 5 to 7 years at a time, right? Your average farm is like every other year. Our neighbor actually on the SP farm has grown corn in their field for 30 years straight. And so they've never rotated. But this gives us the opportunity to not let a brassica touch the same soil for 5 years, right? Organically, we're required to rotate on a 3-year cycle, and when we're audited, they make sure that we haven't planted, right? They're tracking us year over year, and making sure that we're not planting buckwheat 2 years in a row. And so, what this does is actually really mitigates our risks for insects and diseases because insects and diseases have really specific taste. What will go after a Brussels sprout doesn't really much care for buckwheat. And so when you plant Brussels sprouts and then you follow it up with buckwheat, you don't give those diseases and insects the opportunity to really develop. If you were to plant brassicas year after year after year, and vegetables are a lot more susceptible to, insects and diseases as well. If you were to plant that in the same field year after year after year, you are going to lose a crop to an insect or a disease. And we have gone well over 20 years without ever losing a crop to an insect or a disease. And that I think really speaks to the simple power of crop rotation, not having ever used a pesticide or fungicide or synthetic herbicide either. So
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I grew up on a farm in
Right.
northern Wisconsin, and the crop rotation, like you said, sometimes it's either soy and then corn and soy, and that's just the basic way to do it. But for our own farming, we would change from field to field to field. When we were
Hmm.
growing tomatoes, we grow them here, we grow them there, we would move them around.
Hmm.
Interesting. That's so cool. Dr. V, we got you back. You got another question?
Well, I was just going to lean into, I mean, kind of where we were going with that's one of my favorite taglines is organic is cheaper than chemo, right? So, right. So we got these organic vegetables that are loaded with minerals that help prevent cancers, keep the body functioning properly. Whereas the pesticides that most traditional crops, unfortunately, are using are one of the key sources of cancer, unfortunately. So growing these foods properly is going to keep us out of the oncology ward ultimately, huh?
Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. They're doing more research into like rutin and quercetin, some of the bioflavonoids that are present in buckwheat and stuff like that. And there's some cool research into the anti-cancer effects of those specific bioflavonoids. So that's pretty cool. Um, I think there too, there's this idea of like, Dr. Lee, you guys can both have that appreciation. He talked about these unknown factors of food, right? What we now know of as phytonutrients.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people assume that it's like, okay, well, we know everything now, right? We know all the phytonutrients, and it's like, we've probably studied like I think honestly like four or five different of the bioflavonoids that are present like in buckwheat, two of them being rutin and quercetin. There are hundreds of different bioflavonoids, right? And so it's like, okay, we've identified a few that could be, that could prevent cancer, right? Or maybe I shouldn't say that, right? I probably shouldn't say prevent cancer, but support the body in a way that helps it from developing different diseases. And so when you look at those nutrients, um, we've only studied a handful. Like, what other cancer protecting agents are present in these foods that we're eating and taking for granted that we'll probably never have the depth of understanding that it takes? So, those unknown factors that Dr. Lee talked about in our foods are still around today. We've uncovered a few more rocks, and we think we're so much smarter. But really, there's so much more there that we need to trust in the power of whole foods. And there's going to be trends and there's going to be other forms. And, I hearing more about like injectables and liposomic stuff. And, it's crazy. All of what's coming out. And I'm not an expert in any of those arenas. But what I will say is I'm going to trust nature and I'm going to trust God with my supplementation, right? I'm going to trust nature as the true chemist, right? And that's what one of the things Dr. Lee said, right? Is vitamin complexes are so biochemically complicated that only living cells can create them. And so instead of going on for another 10 minutes trying to explain it, I'll just let him explain it in a sentence.
Well, I totally agree. And I often say nutrition is still a young science, which is kind
Hmm.
of, people don't realize that. They think they've discovered all of the vitamins. We're not even close. We're just scratching the surface. And the only way you can truly have confidence that you are getting it is making sure that you're getting it from a whole food natural source. That way, you're getting all of the cofactors and the components that we know are going to help facilitate the function of what we do know is in there. But we definitely need all the other ones that we will hopefully eventually discover what all of those are.
Well, it's like the typical pendulum swing of nutrition, right? It's like, oh, everybody needs vitamin D, and then 5 years later, it's like, wait a minute, we need vitamin K with that vitamin D. Oh, where's the K? Just like you find it in nature, huh?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's everything comes in trends, and I think that's you know, because of marketing supplements. Ultimately, it's kind of the sad thing. It's like, trends come around and then the whole industry markets to them instead of really just focusing all the time on foundational health. And that's why, I've just such a strong appreciation for what the two of you do in practice and, making sure that we're not always following the trends, but making sure that we're giving people what they need all around, right? Now we're not talking about fiber anymore. Fiber was a huge thing for years. We're still not getting enough fiber. Like, you think about detoxification and stuff like that, and how beneficial that is to, actually binding those compounds and excreting them. So it's like, you can kind of pick the thing, and I think that's a really good point.
Speaking of fiber, you guys just upgraded your gastro fiber. Am I correct? I just
Yes.
some change. Can you give us a heads up for those listening to know what that upgrade is that's happened?
Yeah, little decrease in the Collinsonia root, and then we switched to soluble organic carrot fiber
Oh,
was the
wow.
only change. So something very very subtle there, but
What was the reason for that specifically? I know that there was a
um,
value, and I just don't remember what it was because I
yeah,
learned so much
I
that
think
day.
we're having an issue with probably the supplier, but I know it is actually a better form. I don't think it was an organic form before, so now it's the organic soluble carrot fiber
Okay,
that
cool.
we're using in there. So it's actually a better ingredient from that standpoint. And then I think the decrease in Collinsonia root was probably just to kind of fit that ingredient in there with the gastrofiber. So.
I just remember I think it was Weston was talking about it. He seemed pretty excited about this change.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I should look more into that soluble carrot fiber, but they're down at the Nick. They're pretty excited about that one. I think there's additional research and claims around that ingredient that make it quite a bit better than the original carrot fiber that we're using.
just for those of you who don't know what the NIC is, it's a Nutrition Innovation Center that Standard Process also supports because they're trying to always bring the cutting edge of nutritional science from a whole food standpoint so people can really appreciate and understand the power of whole food nutrition. And so and when we're walking around on the farms, these are PhDs who are
Yeah.
educating us about what these subtle changes and how they're trying to bring it all to the next level of really integrating whole food natural the way that God made it for us, right? So that we can get the greatest value out of it. We only have a couple minutes left, and we really appreciate your time, Jack. Seriously, this is such powerful information. People really need to know what's going on. And I really hope that more and more farmers start reaching out to you guys to help to integrate some of this cutting edge, mind blowing practices that you guys have made happen and have demonstrated are sustainable and real. That's what's so cool about your farming. Dr. V, you got any last questions for Jack before we let him go?
Well, we're running out of time. I wanted to bring up the difference of a multivitamin, and I typically see multivitamins causing, and those synthetic B vitamins and things causing stress on the heart, actually, and then compare that to Catalin. But we're kind of out of time. I'm leaving us, setting up maybe for the next podcast, but but I mean that's such a perfect example and summary of really
I'm sure he's saying something really brilliant.
vitamin. This is synthetic, vitamins, right?
Yes, you said it, Dr. V. I wish we could have heard all you said, but you said it.
Oh man.
Hey, I appreciate you joining us from the Netherlands while you're out there on your bike and
Right.
tour.
Looking at all these houses with acres of farmland behind them. We were riding in this neighborhood. There's a canal in front of their house and acres of their own individual farmland behind them. I was like, there's living the dream, huh?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Amen.
How many acres
Yeah.
do you have now, Jack, up there in the farm?
We have about, I think, 868. And then we just purchased another 80 acres that we're converting. It's going to take us 3 years to convert that to organic. So that'll be an additional 80 acres. And we're always looking for more farmland. We're grateful we jumped on that when that farm listed. We were like on it like that. It's right down the road. It's not attached to our farm, but really always looking at expanding and finding more acres. So.
Well,
Awesome.
we again appreciate. What is one final thought that you want to leave everybody with who's been listening with us and stuck with us so far about, I don't know, what is the one thing you'd want to share with everybody today?
Ooh, I think I would just like to inspire people, and I need to be inspired myself too, but to start growing their own food at home too. Like in addition to the taking the standard process supplements and things like that, I think there a lot goes to if we're really going to change this on a broader scale, right? We're gonna have to start growing our own food, and we're gonna have to really start buying and supporting organic. And I know that, there is some fear around trusting organic and stuff like that. But ultimately, if we don't start voting with our dollar, it's not going to change on a broader scale too. So I think in combination of like, we're going to have to start growing our own food a little bit. So I would inspire people to do that, but then keep supporting those local organic co-ops, keep supporting organic farming, because a lot of people ask, well, what are you doing about really changing the landscape of farming and making sure that there's more organic farms. And I'm like, well, what are you doing about it, right? Because until we start voting with our dollar, that's ultimately how
Right.
everything is driven in the US. If people are still going to buy the conventional crap is still going to be king, right? And 1%, 1.5% of America is organic. So we need to continue to support that movement. We need to continue to, vote with our dollars, and that's I guess what I would leave everybody on.
Awesome. And as Dr.
Love
V
it.
said, you can pay the farmer now or you can pay the doctor later, right, Dr. V?
Yeah, love that.
Thank you,
Love
Jack.
that.
Really grateful. Everybody wants to hear this and everybody needs to hear this. They need to know what you guys are doing. It's also cutting edge. It's the future of farming. That's my hope and prayer anyway. So, and
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. V, for joining us all the way from the Netherlands, my friend.
What a kick. Yeah.
You weren't going to miss today. That's for sure.
Seeing all that farmland, it
Yeah.
helps me. It just drives the point home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
guys both. Like I said, it's my favorite topic. So I had a lot of fun with you guys today, talking about all this stuff. Appreciate you having me on here and appreciate what you guys do, right? It's this partnership that we have that allows us to get out there and make people healthy again. So appreciate you both. And thanks for having me on.
You got it.